Sean. Hey, Sean, do you want to be known as Sean on this? Because I noticed that it has your thing listed as boldly trekking. Do you want to be Sean? You want to be
Yeah, just call me
Captain
Sean.
Courageous? All right.
Captain Blood. No.
Yeah.
For those black and white movie lovers out there, if you know who that is. Anyway.
I don't remember Captain Blood.
It's Errol Flynn. It's a great pirate epic film.
Is that back in the swashbuckles?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
gotta watch it. I noticed while editing the video last time that I do a lot of swinging back and forth in this chair, so I'm gonna have to be conscious of that and not do that this time.
Yeah.
Well, today we were going to the subject that we had bandied around about talking about was how the capital ships are just appreciated, underutilized, and underrealized in the Star Trek universe as to actually what they do and what they bring forth. Because unfortunately, due to budgetary constraints and all the stuff like that, and changing directorial kind of things, a lot of that cat just went. A lot of imagery and usage of the capital ships was they were more just used as gunboats instead of fully utilizing and doing everything that they could do, which was one of my huge complaints with the Wrath of Khan, that in order to use the ships the way that they were using the ships, they basically had to strip everybody off the ships. They had to make the Enterprise like completely, being run, by a few people that knew what they were doing, and the rest of it was all just, raw recruits on their first, little float. And with Khan, yeah, they got the super people, but they only have so many super people, so they can't do everything that the Reliant was designed to do.
They couldn't fully staff it,
yeah, they couldn't fully staff it. They couldn't run through and do everything. So that was, what I wanted to talk about was how these ships are not just something to run around and have somebody look really cool in a chair, as rocks come out of the consoles. I was never sure about that.
Or wood ships, in Riker's case from History's Enterprise.
Yeah, but these ships were actually, as they progressed and got larger, and they were floating projections of Starfleet and what they, not just projections of force, but projections of ideology. And when they rolled in, it wasn't just, oh look, somebody's popping around in their Corvette. No, this was like when, like nowadays when a U.S. carrier group comes into, like the Gulf or something like that, or over in the Middle East, when a carrier group rolls in, and that was another thing I wanted to talk about. It's not just, in my belief, with what they have invested and everything, and what we've already discussed last time on how, the sheer number of ships would be a lot greater than what is represented, through the budget that Paramount had. I think that, much like when, one of those aircraft carriers roll through, it is not a singular vessel. It is a part of a task force with all different kinds of smaller vessels that fill different roles. And I think that would also be the case, if you come rolling in the big daddy capital ship, whether it be the B, the C, the D, or whatever, you're going to be completely flanked with Akiras and steam runners and Defiants and bringing it on down to smaller vessels, like the Oberth and, just general freighters and shuttles. I mean, it's going to be a huge, busy hornet's nest of all different kinds of things. And one thing that I always thought, because the way that they represented the accuracy and acuity of their sensors. I mean, when you can tell when a gnat farts 3 light years away. All right. But yet somehow stuff still seems to slip through. I always thought it made more sense where perhaps their sensors are more of of accuracy, good accuracy within, like a system or a part of a system or within a couple light
Mhm.
minutes. Um,
Right.
but after that, you would probably, in my head canon, have
Mhm.
these auxiliary ships that are out there doing running patrols and stuff like that. That's where you'd be getting your data from, and that's how you would know, oh, something's happening over here because this Nova class just went by as it was making sure everything was okay with the sunspots, and that's how we noticed that there's some weird probe in the corona of the sun, is because that ship was there and then went ahead and radioed back with subspace. That's my head canon on how it makes more sense. But I understand, we have to constrain it to plot and budget. But yeah, in my reality, this is the way it goes.
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong in terms of how it shows things have evolved in Next Generation. So I'm going to start
Hmm.
with original series, because actually projection of force is a military term, but the other thing is that it actually does show up in the original series. In Era of Mercy, when the original Enterprise goes to Organia to head off the Klingons, it's the lone ship that shows up first.
Right.
Sulu comes back with the fleet. You don't know how many
Hmm.
ships are in the fleet, but there's a lot
No.
of them, enough to face off the Klingons.
Right.
And so they're getting ready to fight. And you never get to see it, which is a real shame because it would have been kind of cool, but they didn't have the budget for it.
Not at all.
So, and then in another episode, which is actually second season, which is actually one they actually specifically talking about projection of force, or showing the flag as it's called, is Amok Time, when Kirk is trying to get Spock to Vulcan and back and forth again. And they're actually tasked to go to essentially a inauguration in the Altair system. And the thing is that the Enterprise is basically trying to get from point A, which is somewhere out in the Federation, to point B, which is Altair, when Spock has a malfunction. And so Spock's malfunction requires that he goes to Vulcan. And so a greater part of the story is them bebopping around trying to figure out how they're going to do things and what speeds they're going to do. One of the lines, though, is that Spock, or not Spock, but Kirk is talking to McCoy about how the Enterprise is going to be one of 3 starships showing up at the inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
And these are like, essentially, originally in the writing for the script, these are heavy cruisers, just like the Enterprise.
Right.
So the thing is that in the original series, there is not as much in support vessels as they'd like, I really think. They never really explain why. I personally think that the whole thing from earlier time period was that they just didn't have the number of ships. It was with the Federation being 1,000 light years wide and just not having the number of ships they had later.
If I might, it could be a combination of that, and also, when it came to the reality of the show, they were still just beginning to explore this, headcanon universe that they created, and so they hadn't, conceptualized yet that they would need to, show this much is there and stuff like that, because yeah, I just think it might have been so early on, is they were just like, okay, we've got, we got the budget for this many models, all right, this many ships that we can do. The Enterprise, we can only show, yeah, we can only show it from one side, all right.
We can do blue steel this way, or we can do blue steel this way.
Yeah,
we cannot
exactly.
do blue steel on this side.
No, just go ahead. Yeah, it was. It totally was. No, but that's the thing, is they just didn't have, they didn't have the resources to do it. So they, they didn't really want to say, okay, we have like an entire task force here, if they couldn't show it.
Right.
All right.
Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things in my headcanon was, and this is based upon earlier Star Trek works before Enterprise, was there was the Star Trek spaceflight chronology. There was also the FASA works, one of them being the 4 Years' War, which spelled out this conflict the Federation had had before the original series, which
Right.
involved, the Klingons and
The
the
Romulans.
Federation. Well, actually, no, the Klingons and the Federation. It was the 4 Years' War was a battle where Axanar was the focus point, and essentially was resolved by Starfleet cutting off the Klingon Empire, and the border was reassociated, and that's what led to Errand of Mercy, because they kicked the Klingons back to the edge
Right.
where they were at. So anyway,
Okay. Yeah.
the thing was, in my headcanon, was that the reason why that Starfleet was successful wasn't because of sheer numbers or because they had their act together. It was because they finally got essentially a focus where they took like all the differing space navies, like the Vulcan High Command, the Andorian, whatever it's called, the Tellurite Navy, and USPA, which is United Earth Space Probe Agency, or United Earth Space Navy, whatever you want to call it, and got them to all agree to essentially have a single unified command instead of having disparate commands. And so that allowed them to essentially focus their military objectives and actions. Because one of the things is Garth of Izar, who's in another episode much later on, is one of these heroes of Starfleet. There's an illusion that Kirk talks about how Kirk and Spock are brothers because of how the Federation took these powers and put them together, and how that only became possible recently. So the thing about Starfleet is, my view of Starfleet is that the original Starfleet that you have, like before, say, 2240, is a very disparate UN type of thing, where you have USPA, you have the Vulcan High Command, you have all these other agencies. Go ahead.
Well, if I may, because that's one thing that we have to keep in mind is Roddenberry back in the '60s. A lot. He was drawing his inspiration from modern day political and everything that he saw around him. That's the reason the Klingons were Russian, and the Romulans were basically Romans.
Yeah.
I mean, it was right there in the name.
Roman Japanese.
Yeah, Romulus. That's freaking Roman. Yeah, in my belief is what he based the Federation on was the ideal of what the UN was supposed to be. All right.
Yeah.
And if not necessarily the UN, it might be more along the lines of NATO.
Right.
All right. But because of that, I think you're absolutely right. It was only up until recently that they actually got their game together, and instead of being like NATO, where everybody rolls up in their different stuff, I got my F-15, I got my Mirage, or whatever. They're actually rolling up, in something that is purpose built and designed for the Federation, and that could be the reason that at the beginning of TOS, the rollout was sparse to begin with, because you had to get all the shipyards up and producing the hardware. So yes, I agree with you. Sorry, that was a long way to go. Yeah, I agree. Sorry.
It also makes sense about one of the things in Tomorrow's Yesterday, where the Enterprise gets whiplash back in time and gets sent, and it ends up at Earth in 1969, which is actually, oddly enough, they got the timeline for when the first manned moonshot was going to take place. They actually quoted a date indirectly about when it was going to happen. It actually turned out to be actually correct for 1969. Imagine that, Star Trek having any kind of like foreseeing of the future. But
I don't know, as I look at my tablet. No, and that's the thing too, is I'm surprised that they were able to get to the Earth and weren't pelted with all the pieces of Krypton that were landing on the damn planet. But go ahead.
But anyway, as the Enterprise ends up in the past, one of the throwaway lines is how the computer has to be redone and essentially reprogrammed, because they had put in at Signet 14 a few weeks ago, and the people at Signet 14, not having standardized, protocols for handling things, had reprogrammed the ship's computer to have a female personality. And
oh no, that's horrible.
So the misogynistic element of the episode is the computer loves Kirk because you've
Mhm.
got to love Kirk because you're female.
Oh yeah.
So it's for yaks. I mean, it's what it's there for. But it is indicative of this problem we're talking about, where things aren't standardized. You come into this port and you're like, "Hey, my computer's malfunctioning. Can you fix it?" "Sure, we can fix you up." And then they go ahead and reprogram.
We
Wow,
got
this
you.
is
We
not
got you.
what
No
I
problem.
asked for. So,
No,
but getting
but
back
okay.
to
Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was gonna say okay, but getting back to the capital ships as basically cities in space. All right,
Mm-hmm.
and that was my thought when I was putting together a possible subject for this. And I
Mm-hmm.
sent you my notes on it where I wanted to start off. I did this in a nice little thing in 3 parts. The first part was the Oberth class. In
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, one of the unsung heroes out there. Everybody laughs about the Oberth class. I love it. But the thing is, it's often dismissed as fragile, but
Mm-hmm.
it was actually designed to go into areas and do sensor sweeps and testing in areas that were very hostile, just in the very
Mm-hmm.
fabric of space, what was going on. So
Mm-hmm.
there was that, and the fact that it was also extremely modular.
Mm-hmm.
That canoe section on the bottom, as we all know, and everybody's like, well, how do you get down there? If because the people who tear apart the ships, they will always go, okay, if it's this size that they said it was, and then those nacelles that come down, no, not those pylons that come down to the
Mm-hmm.
canoe, those are too thin in order to fit a turbo lift. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's a whole thing of site to site transport and all this stuff like that. And you're only going down there if you have to, work on something. But that whole canoe section is modular of what it could hold and what it could do down there, the sensors, the probes. And you sent over to me a some pictures that you downloaded. Let me
Yeah.
get them. Like, okay, let's start off here. I'm going to share because
Okay.
sharing is caring. All right, window here, share. Okay, so here's your standard Oberth. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
nice, sensor pod canoe thing down below.
Mm-hmm.
But as you had shown here, this is a great, what was it? The Jester Corvette. What was the other word for it?
Asmodeus.
Yeah, the Asmodeus Corvette. And what they had done is they had swapped out the canoe underneath. They had swapped out that with a torpedo pod from a Reliant,
Mm-hmm.
and turned it into a nice patrol boat that could, help, keep the peace in a system, kind of thing.
Right.
And tell you the truth, if I was running some Romulan ale and this came up behind me, I'd shit a tribble. Uh,
It
but
definitely has a lot more teeth than the standard Oberth. So
yes, yeah. Well, the standard Oberth basically only came with one phaser and I believe a backward firing torpedo.
I think it actually just had I think it had a probe launcher.
Well,
Because
it had a
essentially,
probe launcher out the back, but you could swap out the probes for torpedoes.
I don't know if it actually had actual photon torpedoes. I actually only recall it ever having probes.
All I'm
So
saying is if you're a captain worth your salt, all right,
uh-huh.
you're going to have a couple torpedoes stored down there just in case you need them. All right.
They might
They fell off a Ferengi ship. All right. You picked them up and you're keeping them safe. All right.
they might have had nukes. I will give you nukes. I will let you have nukes.
I love how nukes is the lesser evil.
Well, yeah, I mean, considering you could have like a tricobalt bomb that would be like 690 megatons, no big deal. It's
Oh,
just a
no,
flight
nothing.
plan.
Yeah. Radiation. We got pills for that.
Considering the Intrepid had the tricobalt torpedoes or whatever, whenever they first launched for the Voyager episode, Caretaker. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
very
the
first
thing
one.
is
Yeah.
that the thing about the Oberth that's kind of funny is that in terms of design, It is the Swiss Army knife. I'm stealing your line that you used before. The Swiss Army knife of Starfleet ships. It is readily capable, has a lot of features it can be used and swapped out for. Go ahead.
Right. But it's like the smaller Swiss Army knife because,
Right.
as we'll see later on here when we talk about the Miranda, there's some
Uh-huh.
larger Swiss Army knives out there. There's
Uh-huh.
that's more of a Swiss Army dirk or a
Well,
Swiss Army hand and a
if
half.
if you want to do a Paramount property, we might as well do the whole thing with Crocodile Dundee. You think that's a knife, laddie? This is a knife.
This is a knife.
So
Now,
yeah, the Oberth is like the blade is this long, and it has all the attachments, but it's not going to do much of anything if you're really in it.
no, it's not. I mean, what was it on one forum page? I think it was on Facebook. You and I are on. Somebody had posted up a design schematic of the Oberth, and for some stupid reason had a God, what are that called where you keep the trees at?
Arboretum.
Arboretum. Thank you. I keep on wanting to go oubliette, but no, that's not it. Yeah, the Arboretum. They had an Arboretum down in the canoe section, like the Arboretum was all bonsai trees or something. No, but we've seen the Oberth class being used as a troop transport in order to move, people around. If you have, somebody who's enough of a VIP that they need to be ferried from A to B and not just take, normal transport, but they're not so VIP that they're an admiral. You throw them on an Oberth. The Oberth gets them there. Yeah, they've been used for that. They're definitely used for science. They're used for test beds, and we even saw them at Wolf 359.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to remember the name of the ship. It basically ends up getting cut in half, if I remember correctly. In the beginning of Deep Space Nine, it goes by the window real fast as it gets chopped. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the Oberth is it's kind of part and parcel to some of the size problems and that shows up in Star Trek 3. So here's the thing about starships. If you think you know the stated scale or size of a ship, you often are going to be wrong.
Very much, yeah.
So the thing is that if you look at the Oberth, generally most people it's 120 meters long. There's a gentleman whose name is Bernd Schneider. He runs a website called X Asterisk Scientia. I'm hoping I'm not slaughtering that and pronouncing it properly per the Latin. But if you look at this thing that Ash has put up, you'll see that there's like a little bitty Oberth on there. Now, little bitty Oberth is all of 120 meters long, and right next to it is the Klingon bird of prey from Star Trek 3, and that was drawn by Andrew Probert during Star Trek 3's production design phase to give the filmmakers some idea what they were dealing with. Or no, this was actually done in TNG. I'm sorry. What am I saying? This was done during TNG because you can see Andrew Probert's ambassador design between the D and the Excelsior. But you can see the Star Trek 3 ships all on the left-hand side of the image. So the thing that's interesting about the sizing is when you go into look at some of the diagrams that Byrne actually put together, specifically like the deck arrangements. The ship can't really support a real crew at 120 meters long. So he actually points out the ship needs to be larger, about 200 to 220 meters long. And so with that being the case, it makes it even more possible for it to do things. But the problem is it doesn't fit with the diagram. And so
I have heard from the standard short 120 all the way up to the 200, and most of the things that make sense actually put it at about 150 meters. Right. That makes sense when it comes to how the how the decks are laid out, where the windows are, and all the stuff like that. 150 meters makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you just don't have enough deck space for it to actually do much of anything at 120
Yeah,
meters long.
that whole section where you have the shuttles come in
Mhm.
on top of the Oberth, it wouldn't be able to even handle a work bee if it was down to the 120 meter. It would be too small, almost too small to fit those in.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
basically only have enough room really to be a window, more or less, and it'd be a very wide, expansive window, but it'd be a window, pretty much.
It's only at that size. It would only be enough to actually be a door in the bridge that you would open up and let space in for some stupid ass reason, like in that one TNG episode.
The Naked Now.
Yeah, the Naked Now.
They were blown out the space there.
Yeah. That was a silly one. That was definitely writers who had no idea what the hell they were doing. But you know what? First couple seasons, you're gonna have that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So and also, as you were talking about, when it comes to the scale on these ships, when it comes to on-screen scale, I should say, the on-screen scale of these ships changes from episode to episode as for what they need. Because how many times did they show a bird of prey that is literally the size of like the saucer section of the Enterprise D?
Right.
All right. And these little pea shooter bird of preys roll in, and now all of a sudden they're able to, even with the shields properly working, just a couple of hits, they're taking down the Enterprise. I don't think so. I mean, that's way too much plot ammo right there. But anyways, yeah. So it scales, and also when it came to the Klingon Civil War, all of a sudden the bird of prey became the de facto ship of the Klingons. D7s and the Katingos were out the damn window. Everybody was flying around in a bird of prey because it was cool. And it's like everybody's wants a Ford Mustang, while technically the AMX Javelin was a very superior car, but nobody wants to talk about that. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. Okay. I'll get on another soapbox.
I perfectly understand your soapbox. I actually had a little bit of a animosity, a little bit of hate for the bird of prey during the 90s, because it was like it was everything. Every VFX shot, every Klingon antagonist always had a bird of prey, just about, because they'd done a lot of VFX shots for it, and so it showed up relentlessly throughout the 90s. And then if you went to a convention, you'd always hear some fanboy going, "Hey, I got this bird of prey." I'm like, I don't need a roasted bird. Get the roasted bird out of my face.
This isn't Thanksgiving.
When Kurn actually was in there's a little aside about burnt birds. There's a scene from when Kurn, Worf's brother, is introduced, where they're having him have a dinner in his honor, and so they've replicated a turkey, and he'll have some of their burnt, replicated bird meat. And so every time I think of a bird of prey, I always think of that scene. So I just had to bring that up. But the sizing issue with the bird of prey is so wild that when you watch Star Trek 3, the one that actually has the biggest sizing issues, you go from like the little bitty, like it's like the little bitty transport, and then you have the huge bird of prey come up alongside it. Then you have it attack the Grissom, and then you have it attack the Enterprise. They're all different scales and sizes relative to those ships. So it's kind of funny to actually, what size are we dealing with today? Well, we've reduced the ship down to about 100 meters for now. But if you really need it, sir, we can boost it back up to 300 meters long.
Oh, yeah. Well, technically, if you want to, get down to brass tacks, I think bird of preys should be constrained to just large enough to barely fit 2 sperm whales. All right, no, 2 humpback whales. Excuse me, 2 humpback whales. All right, you get the 2 humpbacks in. That's all you get, because as Scotty said, they barely fit, but we got them. All right, so if it's any larger than that, it's too big. If it's any smaller than that, it's too small. You got to fit 2 humpback whales in it. And
So all William Shatner's toupees got discarded, the Klingon food
yeah,
packs,
yeah,
and everything
toss those
else
out the window.
got
Yeah,
tossed out the window. But we got
yeah,
the whales.
yeah. We got the important stuff. All right, we got to shut down V'ger's little brother. Um, the probe. But anyway, yeah. So that was the Oberth. The Oberth, in my beliefs, even though technically it was a smaller vessel, it still was able to bring some of the Federation in. It had enough room in there, so that it was. It was a decent size, it was a decent size and decently capable little unit. But moving on to the next one, we're going to talk about the Miranda. All right. The Miranda class, as you and I well know, and this is one thing that I found out. I mean, I didn't conceptualize it. I didn't really conceptualize it until I started building models. And at one point, I was building the 1/1000 scale Miranda class, and I had purchased some extra files to print in my resin printer for the shuttle bay and all the little shuttles to put in there. And it was at that point that I'm putting that together, 2 shuttle bays, and putting it all in there, and realizing that's just what you can see. It doesn't include where it wraps around in U shapes inside. There's a lot more going on in this Miranda than what we've been led to believe. Yeah. And from there, I started downloading, the blueprints offline and looking at it, and that's a pocket carrier. That's what that bad boy is right there. That is, that's like, the British carrier that they sent to the Falklands. I mean, it may not be a bad boy, I mean, a big boy, but it's definitely, it's got the birds on board, and it will take care of business. And that was
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the things about the Miranda is that many people have done like volume studies and volumetric studies of, the design of the Miranda and how much space is on board the Miranda. It actually outdoes the Constitution or Connie 2 easily.
The refit or the A. Yep.
Yeah.
And the thing is not only does it have more cubic volume, than the Constitution class refit, but it has more internal volume that's better laid out.
Yeah.
All right. So in my opinion, it's more useful volume.
Yeah. It's actually a funny thing because the design of the Miranda, of the Reliant, effectively only came about because Harve Bennett didn't want the Enterprise to be facing off a sister ship in Wrath of Khan. So they basically came up with something that was derivative of the Enterprise. It has a lot of the features that the Enterprise has. It has more photon torpedo launchers for it actually, in its original incarnation, if people aren't aware. I don't know if you got a photo. I forgot to get a photo of this. The original orientation of the Reliant is upside down, and it has 2 sets of photon torpedo launchers on pods instead of like what people call mega phasers. But they are upside down, and they're on the ends of the pylons. And there's 2 forward on each side, and there's 2 aft on each side. So that boy's packing some firepower.
Hold on. I can do you one better. Hold on. Sure. All right. Here we go.
Yeah. Just basically flip it upside down, and where the little knobs are on the end of the pylons.
No, those knobs were right here.
Yeah, but on the original blueprint, it was upside down, so the pods are on the bottom. And so,
and that's the funny thing is originally the Constitution class Enterprise, the original drawing had that the other way, where these were on the bottom, and when it got sent for approval, he had the drawing upside down and said, "Yeah, that looks good." And that was the exact opposite of what happened on this one.
Yeah. They both got reversed. Or inverted. But the thing that also is kind of comical about it is that with the Miranda being the ship that it is, for the job that it was sent out to do, which was to survey and explore sites for the Genesis device, it's packing a lot of firepower. It has the same number of phasers that the Enterprise has. It has more photons than the Enterprise
Mm-hmm.
has, and it has more volume, and it has the larger shuttle bays. So it is like a pocket carrier. It's like a stripped down. If you were to take it into combat scenario, yeah, you could easily have more people on board. You could have effectively, if you had Federation troops on board, you could use it as a ship to have people use it as an assault ship, and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, it's a very versatile little ship. One of the other things that's kind of funny about the design of the Miranda, and I wanted to point this out, was that it has been remodularized to the point where there are so many derivative design ships off of it. Like the Soyuz class came before the Miranda, apparently, but it has a whole bunch of add-on features to the model that weren't on the original Miranda Reliant model.
Yeah.
And then you have, like Fandom has gone ahead and created modifications of it as well. So there's there's the Avenger class, there's the Nox, and what was the other one that's popular? I think it's Titanic. No, it's not Titanic. But anyway, Nox is like a chopped version of the back end of the ship.
What was the one Kelsey Grammer was in? Was that
was the Soyuz class?
Was that the Soyuz one? Okay.
Yeah, that's the Soyuz class. So like the design came out in 1982, but everybody extrapolated other designs off of it. So there's the Coventry class, which is one of my favorite ones for like pre, TNG coming out with a design where it was essentially a TOS version of the Miranda, and then people have like come out with extrapolations of the design later, and now you have like in the Star Trek Next Generation and in like the Star Trek online game, there's modified versions that actually are like refitted Star Trek Next Generation and whatnot designs of it. So it's kind of funny to see how modular they are, but also it's also kind of humorous to see how people's imaginations go with it, and you end up with all sorts of different developments or evolutions of the design going forward.
And the only thing that I wish, and this is something that I've often complained about because, I lived a bitch. But one of the things that I've often complained about is that there's so much, especially when you look at the FOSSA stuff, there's so much where all they did was just change an nacelle over here or move something over here. And now it's a completely different class. I mean, I wish there was more variety in them, and that was one of the things that made the Miranda stand out from the Constitution class, was the fact that it was a distinctive, and that was one of the things that they wanted, was when you looked at them in silhouette, you could tell them apart from silhouettes. And a lot of those derivations out there that people quibble over, you couldn't, I remember back when I was a kid, living on military bases, we used to get stuff from our dads all the time. And one of the things was enemy ID poker, cards. And there would be, every card would have a different silhouette of a different, enemy vehicle, so that you can learn the different vehicles by their silhouettes, for identification. A lot of stuff out there for Starfleet, you would need not those cards. You need something else to tell them apart, because those cards are not enough, because they're too much alike. I mean, you can tell the Nova class from a steam runner and stuff like that. Those are distinct. But when it comes to the FOSSA ships, there's not enough distinction there to appeal to me. But that's just
I feel you. I feel you. I will say that this brings up actually a point. One of the things in the Navy is that there are so many different
the Seven Seas
in the Navy. Yeah,
I know. I had to. Sorry.
Good reference. Good catch there. What I was going to say is that the Navy has so many ship designs that are very similar to one another. I mean, to the layman, you wouldn't be able to know the difference because, what's the difference between this class and this class and this class? Well, the placement of the tower versus the length of the flight deck, the type of flight deck, and whether the hull has this type of angle or this type of angle. There's a variety of different things. Yeah, if you're just glancing at it and you don't know anything about it, you probably it looks all the same to me. But then that ideology, that thought process. Think about, this is not saying in support of FASA, but if you look at Starfleet and starships in it, the Enterprise is a Constitution class starship. It's a Starship class starship, if you want to get really brass tacks to the fact that when the series was originally created. But the Constellation, getting to it just for a moment, was an AMT model, and the inaccuracies in the AMT model are huge. I mean, you cannot say, okay, this is exactly the same. The lines don't match up, however you want to do it. But what's funny is if you take the AMT model and you size it up to the same scaling as the original Enterprise, then the primary hull and a lot of the stuff line up pretty much. But it's like it's a different class of ship. So one of the things is that I'm a proponent of, and this is my headcanon, is that there's a variety of slightly different designs that are like coming out that are like the Soyuz looks a lot like a Miranda, but it's not a Miranda. And then you have the Miranda.
It's iterative. Iterative.
Yeah. And so you end up with variations on a theme. And so I think that the budget aspect of making a TV show kind of comes into this. You got lack of budget. You don't have the money to make a new ship of the week, supposedly. And then you're going to have like, how are you going to display these ships? Well, I'm going to just change the name on the hull. I'm going to put new digits on it and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's generally how it's done. But, right. But you might end up with like, variations on a theme. The Miranda in one section of the galaxy may be a completely different design than another Miranda in another section of the galaxy.
And that's another thing, coming out of different shipyards.
Yeah.
All right. And I fully agree with that. I mean, even during World War II, the different pilots, they could tell, did this plane come out of Seattle, or was this plane built in Wichita? This one, the ones in Wichita, they can't handle hills, but man, they can take a side wind. For those who don't know, we live in Wichita. There is no topography. There is no topography.
That is a
actually, they someone did the statistics on it, and if you blew up a pancake to the size of the state of Kansas, there would be more elevation change in the pancake than there is in the state of Kansas. But anyway, yes, but we got way off course of what I was originally thinking that we were going to talk about, which was how these ships were being used as not a projection of force, but a projection of Starfleet and their ideology. Because when they rolled into town, they let everybody know, okay, we're all under this same umbrella. All right, we're all Starfleet. Here's the representation of it. It's a whole city that came in. And when the Oberth rolled in, it was a small town that rolled in. Maybe a village. When the Miranda class rolled in, that was a good sized town that came in. But later on, when the task force surrounding the Galaxy classes rolled in, that's when you had basically an entire, if not city state that rolled in, where that fleet, basically, the fleet captain or the fleet admiral, whoever is in charge of the whole task force, that is going to be that is going to be commander in chief. That is going to be judge, jury, and executioner. He or she is everything when it comes to that city rolling in. And basically what they're able to bring, they could come into a sector, and just in the amount of technology, manufacturing capabilities, resources, first aid, emergency stuff, uh, everything that they bring to bear.
Mhm.
It would be like, when, the entire FEMA rolls in and takes care of everything. Uh, Theoretically, we won't get into politics right now, but no, but when they roll in and everything gets taken care of, and they affect things. That once that whole task force rolls in, anybody who's been causing problems, they're going to be wanting to lay low. All right.
Mhm.
Nobody, wants to fire their gun off in the sky when you can see the police car just right down the street. And that's basically what happens when they roll in my opinion.
Yeah,
And
actually, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't know
no,
you
no,
were
no, no,
firing
please,
away.
please. I paused for a purpose because, I needed to shut up.
Um, with Starfleet vessels and how they would operate, for the most part, I would think that Mirandas are like the workhorse and so are the or Oberth class of getting things done in the fleet. They're easily built, they're easily maintained, they get
Hmm.
around, they get to where they need to go. They have a set, speed value that you could be dependent on to arrive by a certain point. You know, hey, from point A to point B, we talked about last week, how long it would take a ship to get from places to
Right.
places. And so, they're dependable. They are,
Yeah.
they have a low FOB, frequency of operational breakdown. Um,
They are the
and
Sherman tanks.
yeah, they may not be the prettiest starships ever created, but they sure can get it done.
Yeah,
And in the case of like Miranda's, in a lot of cases, they can dish it out too. Um,
exactly.
so it's one of those things where they may not be the highlight of anybody's Starfleet career necessarily, especially if you're on a freighter. But it gets the job done, and you're able
Hey,
to help people, which is what one of Starfleet's major credos is. Um, the other element with like the Miranda is it has a huge scientific payload platform it can actually utilize with the probe.
hmm
I mean, as a probe ship, um, this is actually headcanon for me. I think that Starfleet would be really into probes and into drones because
hmm
you don't really want to just have your ships going you know to every single star system as it goes. You might want to like come into an area, shoot off some probes and some drones, have them look at things, feed the information back to the ship, and then move on and do that kind of thing. And actually, in the original series with Oromite Maneuver, they sort of hint at that.
hmm
We've been star charting for like days on end. It's been weeks, or like, yeah, well, this is the job. You drew the lot to actually survey and star chart things.
Yeah.
And even Excelsior and Star Trek Six, they've been charting gaseous anomalies. Ooh, this is exciting work. That gas cloud is fifty
Hey,
thousand light years or 50,000 kilometers across. Well, we've got it charted now.
well, let me
And
tell you, as someone who's been in the military, boring is good. All
yeah,
right, because if it's
you don't
not
want to
boring,
be
that
there.
means it's exciting, which is not never really good. But
As the bulkhead
that
explodes
means
next to you.
yeah, but not everybody's going to be able to be, on one of the glory ships. Everybody,
Mhm,
was looking to get on postings on Galaxy classes and stuff like that. And you even saw
mhm,
that represented in the series where people were like, "Oh, when there's an opening, I'm going to put my name in. Hopefully, I'll be able to get on and stuff like that."
mhm,
But but it's like anything in the out there. Like in the Air Force. 99% of the Air Force are people who don't fly.
mhm,
And it's all the support stuff in order to get, that, jet jockey over, to do what he needs to do. When I was in the infantry, as they pointed out, for every boot on the ground, you got like 100 people in the rear in order to support you. You got logistics, you got everybody running everything else. There's just this huge monolith that needs to be out there in order for where the pointy end of the stick is. The pointy
Mhm.
end is just a little bit of the stick. You got the rest of the stick to deal with. Um, but
That's a lot
and
of thick,
that
man.
being yeah, and that being said, is that there is with the smaller ships and stuff like that, and even let's say that you got middle range, you got yourself on a Miranda, you might be on a
Mhm.
Miranda, but you might still be who was it? Lister. Was that who it is in Red Dwarf?
Yeah, Lister's the one.
Yeah. You still might be Lister and Red Dwarf and refilling the vending machines. Okay. um, I mean, even if you got on the Miranda, you would be lucky if you were one of the Peregrine pilots or one of the people flying some of the shuttles. There's a good possibility that you could just be out there, scraping tribbles off of the nacelles, every time they pull into port. Um, so
And thus he hit on one of my favorite lines for nacelle cleaning duty. So if you upset the captain, it's time to go out and clean the nacelles, gentlemen.
Oh yeah, nothing like scrubbing the barnacles off. Um,
While we're at war, have
yeah,
fun.
yeah. Just don't look at the pretty lights. Um, no, there is a lot of cogs that make each of these machines work, and even with each machine, um, is itself just a cog in a larger thing going on.
Mhm.
And that's what I wanted to get at was the fact that the way that they were represented on screen due to budgetary constraints, and they were not represented, I believe, as fully and as game changingly as they should have been, and nor were they shown as part of the task force that I believe they should have been a part of. I
Yeah,
mean,
I would
every
agree.
Galaxy class Roland should have had at least 20 or 30, support ships with
Right. I think
it. At the
what you're basically your problem is the production design element of having the funding to support
Oh
the
yeah,
filming and putting all the elements together for that to actually have that show up. But I think it's
well,
something, with AI you could have it recomposited and you could end up with stuff like that.
and that's my thought is now, as as our technology has gotten better when it comes to producing these and rendering them.
Hmm.
Um, it's like I recently saw somebody had posted up something where they had redone like all of the beauty shots of these ships
Hmm.
from Star Trek Five, but
Hmm.
he used his personal models and did some great beauty shots on his
Hmm.
personal models and tied them in with stuff, and they looked great.
Hmm.
And he did that himself with just a camera, whatever little prosumer camera he had and whatever
Hmm.
software he had on his computer at home.
Hmm.
And he did what conceivably would have cost the studios a couple $1 million back in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
So I think yeah, nowadays it would be more capable of them rendering how big and how much of everything it would have been, because that's the whole thing, is there's much to it,
Right.
and they just didn't show the muchness. I'm sure
I agree.
that grammatically is great. It's a great word that I'm using there.
Well, the other thing is like when we talk about like fleets and whatnot and designs and support vessels and whatnot, I think there's a there's a problem in the way things are sort of put together verbally, for descriptions. Like Deep Space Nine, with its Dominion War, talks about the Galaxy wing of ships would be a lot more than just 3 or 4 Galaxy class starships. A wing is a much larger number of vessels. Um, and we're not even using Navy terminology, because when you get into wings, that's
It's
Air
Air
Force.
Force. Yeah.
Yeah, not Navy. Navy would have been flotilla or group or task force. Um,
Right.
and so we're mixing and matching things, I guess, as need be. But one of the things, and this is actually getting into one of our joint enjoyment and little things we both have discussed. It is Lower Decks. Lower Decks is
Yes.
actually, I love Lower Decks because it shows a Starfleet vessel that is not your creme de la creme of assignments. It's not like, oh, I got assigned
Hmm.
to the Cerritos. Woo. You
Yeah.
know, you know, at the beginning of the show, the Cerritos is like, okay.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, it really shows you the nuts and bolts of how things work in Starfleet. Um, the crew are presented in a comedic kind of almost Rick and Morty kind of way, but they are realistic to the work that they have to do. They may not be pleasant,
Right.
they may not be nice, but they deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis, and they go from point A to point B doing these jobs. Starships, for the most part, in my opinion, in terms of how Starfleet would work, mostly have day-to-day jobs of ferrying stuff from point A to point B, uh, doing stellar surveys, doing the grunt work. How many sectors have we charted today, sir or lieutenant? Well, we surveyed 30. We still have another
Hmm.
20 today that we're going to be looking at. And so on and so forth. It may not be the most exciting thing to look at, and that's why we don't hear a lot of that in the narrative.
Yep.
But then somebody has to do the work. I mean, you don't get the Master and Commander movie with all the ships doing the same thing that Master Commander does. You
Right.
have other support vessels doing other work to get that to that point.
And
So I'm
that's
trying to
also the reason that a lot in those episodes, those what they showed on screen, because they needed, the drama. All right.
mm-hmm,
They needed to have their basically, what Star Trek was it
right.
was a moral plays. All right.
Mm-hmm,
And in order to have their little moral plays, you'd see them all the time. Well, we're over here, bringing supplies over, and then this happened, or we're over
mm-hmm,
here, and we're going to go ahead. We're on our way to do a mapping, but wait, this happened. It's always what they were doing getting
mm-hmm.
interrupted,
Right.
and yeah, I think they showed that. But one other thing I wanted to bring up really quick before we tie everything up here is
Mm-hmm,
I was going to point out the simple fact, like one of the things that always holds me back from this envisionment that I have of you know of all these fleets of ships out there, all the hundreds of thousands of ships that we talked about,
mm-hmm,
um, was being able to build them. All right, getting all those supplies.
mm-hmm,
But I think what a lot of us are not taking into account is the sheer mass of mineable supplies that are out there in space. They've already talked about here now in reality of
mm-hmm,
mapping out asteroids out there, that just one asteroid has more rare earth elements and more palladium elements and all the stuff like that than have ever been mined on Earth.
mm-hmm.
And just being able to get all that out of one asteroid, and then you multiply that by however many that we don't even have a good number. We have estimates. We have good estimates of how many of them are out there. But
Mm-hmm.
once you take all those into account and realize that they have a they have an ability to actually mine those in space and get the materials they need, and just automate that from mining. You can have one guy running all of his droids and mining out the asteroid. It's my claim. Damn claim jumpers. Pew pew. Anyway, and go from him or them or whatever all the way through, and through the production line, and get it out the other end through the DS9, through the processing. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And then out, because that's what DS9 was. DS9
Mm-hmm.
was an
Or
ore processing
processing
facility.
factory. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's where your central hub of bringing it into is. And then, the semi finished products go out and then go to where they're needed. And that's where you get the materials that you need for the replicators to use those raw materials in order to produce, your bulkheads and your seats and your consoles filled with rocks and wood chips and all the good stuff, the captain's chair that, never seems to have a freaking seatbelt, all these good things. Um, they can all be made with the products that they can get from getting it from mining it in space. And then just your luxury stuff, once you get up to the D, which is the floating luxury hotel in the sky, that's when you have the wood trim. All right.
Mm-hmm.
but all the way back with the Connie and stuff like that. Nah, your desk is not wood trim. You're no.
It's laminated, sir. Your desk
Yeah,
is laminated. What are you expecting
no.
wood for? I mean, come on.
Somebody
really?
came in and painted, grain lines on it. That's what you have. You have grain line painted plastic.
But now we can have fireplaces in space.
Oh yeah, that's how we know that we've succeeded. You got your, yeah. I mean, there's some things I really like about Strange New Worlds, and some things I'm thinking, okay, you jumped the shark. You jumped the shark on that one. And I think having that room in space, yeah, you jumped the shark on that one, guys. But okay, I just wanted to bring that up because I know that eventually somebody watches this and they're gonna be like, well, how are they able to build all these ships you're talking about? It's all there, and as a matter of fact, it's much easier to get it to farm it in space than it is to bring those materials up the gravity well. That is very much more energy intensive, escaping the gravity well. Once you get away from the gravity well, then the solar system is your oyster.
Right. I mean, power intensive work is all against gravity because essentially the more gravity you have to work against to put stuff up into the space, the worse it's going to be. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I find, as a personal aside, the 2009 Star Trek movie kind of funny and kind of frustrating at the same time, because
when
why are we building the Enterprise on the ground? I mean,
so he could sit there and look at it. All right, that was the whole reason. So he could sit there and look at it. All right,
it's built in Riverside, Iowa. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
If you need to, I guess we will.
Yeah. As if it did not make more sense to build them in Brazil or someplace right along the equator so you could use that gravity assist to get out. No, let's build it in Iowa.
Because Kirk lived there. Because his father lived there.
Just because he lived there doesn't mean they had to build the ships there. Anyways, did we cover everything we wanted to cover today?
Pretty much. I think that I will say that with the thing you hit on earlier, which was the modularity of the different designs, I think one of the things that actually comes out in if you ever get a chance to read the novel for Star Trek II, it actually proposes an idea that the Enterprise had gone through a refit for doing the Academy work, and they had replicated the stations. So, like, bridge stations were replicated in another spot. So the people who, like, were the cadets, if they screwed up, there'd be another station where somebody go, oh, no, we're not doing that. No, we're not hitting the big red button to eject the warp core, that kind of thing. And so there was like lots of double up stations, and it would also explain why the photon torpedo launcher was so manually loaded. So it came down on a little conveyor and then trucked its way down a little strip. Meanwhile, the captain's like, where's my torpedo? And, that kind of thing. But Vonda and McIntyre basically explains that I believe, if I remember correctly how she explained it, they lifted the primary hull off, stuck another primary hull on, changed out several components in the engineering section, and went, presto, here's your training ship. And the Enterprise went on its merry way. And part of the reason why you had such problems with the ship in Star Trek II was because it was a training ship. It had been modularly switched out. And, Khan, of course, he doesn't care whether there's training cadets or whatever on board. He's just like, hey, you know what? I'm going to light you up here. Let me hit this button. Let me show you how this is done. And then, of course, the Enterprise gets wrecked. But, as for, why the Enterprise, and this is my headcanon, just to let me roll this thing down. The reason why in Star Trek IV, why they could get an Enterprise back so quickly is because they went, hey, you know what? We have that primary hull that we had disconnected and it's no longer in service. Hey, you know what? Let's put the secondary hull on there. We'll just change the number on the primary hull. You're done. You got yourself a ship again. Hey, and guess what? The crew gets their ship back. Hey, awesome. Good times.
What was it? Theseus's ship. You replace this, you replace this. When is it still the ship? It's Theseus's ship.
Yeah, that's exactly my thought. Is how that happened. Is that everybody's like, Well, what was the Enterprise? Was it like a new build ship? Was it like a refit? Was it the Yorktown? They just painted different hull numbers. I'm like, well, that'd be like the ultimate insult. You'd served on the Yorktown for how many years, and then they said, no, just scrape the number off and scrape the name off. Paint Enterprise and then NCC 1701A. I'm like, wow, that's just brutal.
Yeah, someone's going along with a spray can inside. It's got to smell like Vulcan farts in here. Yeah, okay.
But yeah, so yeah, I think the module element to Starfleet allows them to do a lot of different things. I just don't think it's ever been explored as well as it should have. But I think that Lord Dex did a pretty good job of it. I think that, obviously, as we discussed, it happens a lot more, and there's a lot more of it than you see on the show because, well, they don't have the time or the reason to discuss it. But I think actually it makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does, and especially when you look at even with our military that we have now, a lot of our vessels are they have whole components that can be swapped out, whole sections of decking, whole things like, okay, you're on this and such mission, okay, let's pull let's pull out the missile launching cubicle and put in the Navy SEAL cubicle so they can launch the little boats and stuff like that. And yeah, so there's even modularity in that. So of course they would build in the modularity into these structures as well. And so yeah, I agree with you totally. And so if there is that involved, then that means that there's ways that are built into the ships that make it easier for them to swap things out. All right, you should be able to just remove all the deck plating on the dorsal surface of this area, lift it up, lay it over to the side, pull out this section, put in a new section, chunk it back. You may have lost your stellar cartography, but now you have in an entire, biological suite, so you can do bio studies. So yeah, there's no reason that they couldn't do that.
Oh yeah, especially now with like Picard last season with Vox, where the big reveal. And I'm not going to tell you what the big reveal is because if you haven't seen Picard, that's your fault. But
it is my fault. I couldn't get past the first 2 episodes. I mean, literally, it hurt me to see Picard so old and ready to die. I couldn't. So I need to give it another shot.
I remember when I used to say engage.
Oh yeah, oh, did another sun blow up? I'll just be over here puttering through the vineyard. Yeah, no, I couldn't do it again. Yeah, but I will watch it. Like right now, I'm going through and I'm watching everything again. I'm almost done with TNG. I've already watched Voyager. I've already watched TOS. I'm gonna watch DS9 again, and then go through Enterprise. I don't know if I'll be able to stomach. I haven't yet started.
I'd probably do Voyager and then jump to Picard because you'll have less transitional shock, in my opinion. And then
I've already watched the Voyager here recently. Yeah.
But
I have yet to see any of I haven't seen any of Prodigy.
Prodigy is actually pretty good. I actually like Prodigy.
I can't find it on Paramount Plus.
Really? It's on Netflix.
That might be why. I'll check my Netflix then because I've looked at it several times on Paramount Plus and not seen it.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. Okay. But what I was going to say is, not naming things, but the ultimate of like, hey, you know what? We've got this extra piece of ship hanging about. We'll just take this other ship and we'll just click. Oh, look!
Everything lines up. Everything lines up. All the wiring, all the tube work, everything was perfect. You can take just take the turbo lift. It'll take you all the way. It matched right up. Okay, fine. I'm gonna have to watch this shit. But anyways, that I believe wraps it up. Do we have we decided yet what we're going to talk? Oh, next week we will not be here next week because next week is on Saturday is when our local Star Trek little fan group meets. We meet once a week. Once a month. Second Saturday of the month at the Burrow here in Wichita, and 7 o'clock. Anybody wants to show up? 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
I believe it's actually 6 o'clock. I think
it might be 6 o'clock.
That's
And not to
Matic. And
yeah, go
we're
ahead.
going to be. We're actually referring to the Beowulf, which is the shuttle off of that. We are relaunching ourselves as a Starfleet chapter. So if anybody's interested in being part of a remote or essentially online Starfleet vessel, and you would like to participate in things of this sort, in a sort of like meeting atmosphere, that's something we're organizing. So that would be the Starship Beowulf off of the Jeanette Maddox. So come on out to the Jeanette Maddox meeting next Saturday, and if you want to talk to me about the Beowulf and you are feeling froggy, feel free to frog out.
What we'll do is we'll make sure when we post this up to YouTube and to Twitch. No.
Well, no, TikTok.
Yeah, Twitch, TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay. A way to make it so the Americans can't see it. Anyway, when we post it up, we'll make sure in the description to put the contact information for the Beowulf. That way. Excuse me. Oh God, I couldn't hit the mute button fast enough. I apologize. We'll put up the contact information for Beowulf for anybody who wants to think about joining up as a remote individual with the Beowulf.
Awesome.
All right. In that case, we will not be up here next week, but we'll be up here the week after, which would put it. Let me see. That's not the 8th, so that would put us at the 15th.
Yep.
Yeah, the 15th. We'll be back. Yep. Like a bad rash. We'll be here.
Shalom.
Nanu.
Rock out.
All right. It's shut down, and